Okay, so good evening, everyone. Um, my name is Neve Gordon, and I'm the Vice President of the British Society for Middle East Studies. I'm so happy so many of you have joined us to listen to Professor Mohsen Kadivar, and I'm so happy that he had the time to come and give us what I'm sure will be a brilliant talk. Before I turn the mic to my friend and colleague, Dr. Alam Saleh, who will be introducing Professor Kadivar, I would like to say a few words about the work that BRISMIS has carried out over the past year. BRISMIS currently has around 500 members from all over the world, about 25% more than we had just a couple of years ago. The British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies, steered by Dr. Lloyd Ridgen and a wonderful editorial board, is thriving. I should note that this past year, BRISMIS Council decided to change the authors' affiliation guidelines in line with the changes made in journals in Australia and Canada. From now on, authors from occupied or colonized land who wish to include their university affiliation must acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of the land on which their institution has been built. During the past year, our Prizes, Awards, and Scholarships Committee has introduced a number of new prizes. In addition to the Leigh Douglas Memorial Prize for the Best Dissertation, we have established an Early Career Development Prize and Conference Student Paper Prize. The goal of these prizes, and one or two more that are currently in the making, is to support young scholars. Our graduate section, under the remarkable leadership of Maral Shamshiri Farad and Lucy Garbett, organized a series of amazing events, from the ABC of publishing to grant writing and postdoctoral fellowships. These events were attended by hundreds of students from all over the world and have now been watched by hundreds more on YouTube and other platforms. Maral and Lucy have also been instrumental in thinking about other ways of supporting up-and-coming scholars. In a similar vein, our outreach committee, led by Dr. Teodora Todorova, has organized several events this past year, at least one of which was in collaboration with the British International Studies Association. This might be a good place to announce that in February we'll be holding a fascinating event about teaching Palestine, so please do look out for the announcement. For months now, John Chalcraft, Malaka Shweik, and Nadine Dekak have been working on organizing what will surely be an incredible annual conference at St. Andrews University. From what I've heard, we received over 400 paper submissions, which are currently under review by about 24 members who volunteered to help. Finally, BRISMIS Committee on Academic Freedom has been inundated by complaints against institutions and states that have been stifling academic freedom in the UK and the Middle East. Just last month, BRISMIS Council members met the Minister of University Affairs, Michelle Donnellan, to discuss the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. In the meeting, we explained why the definition is not fit for purpose. More recently, we launched a book talk together with 3 other professional associations after the University of Glasgow used the IHRA definition to violate one of our members' academic freedom. I would also like to note that due to the increasing workload of the Committee on Academic Freedom, we will soon be publishing a call to all members asking for a few more volunteers to join the committee. All of this to underscore that we have been very, very busy this past year. I would like to extend a huge thanks to my fellow BRISMIS officers, Professors John Chalcraft and Tim Jacoby, to Amy Brickhill, Christmas administrator, to Nadine Dakak, our new conference organizer, and finally to all the members of the British Council who have put in hours and hours of work to make all of this happen. And now, without further ado, I will turn the mic over to Alam, who will introduce Professor Kadivar.
All right. Hello. I'm really thrilled and honored to host Professor Mohsen Kadivar today at our 2021 annual lecture titled Transformation of Islamic Republic to Islamic State of Iran. It's such a great pleasure to be here today. Thanks for Professor Kadivar for accepting the invitation, and thank you everybody for being here today. But before I start introducing Professor Kadivar, which is not an easy job, please let me know. Let me tell you that we will have about half an hour time in the end of lecture to do the Q&A session. You can write your questions or you can raise your hand, and based on our time, will allow you to ask your question. Professor Mohsen Kadivar is a research professor in the Department of Religious Studies at Duke University. Professor Kadivar is one of the most original and prolific figures of the Iranian reform movement. He is a leading theologian and philosopher and intellectual who has written groundbreaking books on human rights and Islam. Also on Islamic political thoughts and Islamic philosophy and theology. Kadivar began his theological studies in October 1980 in Shiraz Seminary School, and in mid-June 1981 he transferred to the city of Qom to study at the seminary school in Qom. In 1984, he began his intermediate courses, and he completed his final at the top of his class in 1988. In October 1987, he began his advanced courses in methodology of jurisprudence under the mentorship of Ayatollah Mirza Jawad Tabrizi and Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Hashemi Shahrudi and Ayatollah Kazem Hosseini Ha'iri. He then completed his advanced courses in jurisprudence under the supervision of Ayatollah Mirza Jawad Tabrizi and Ayatollah Hosseini Rouhani. Professor Kadivar also experienced a decade of studies under the mentorship of Ayatollah Hossein Ali Montazeri, from who he has learned discussions on lambsgiving, zakat, the guardianship of the jurist, and the forbidden businesses. For 16 years, he has studied Islamic theology, philosophy, mysticism, and Quranic studies under prominent scholars, most importantly, Ayatollah Abdullah Jawadi Amuli. After 17 years of studies at Qom Seminary School, at the age of 39, Mohsen Kadivar was handed out his certificate of Ijtihad, the highest degree in Islamic religious tradition, by his mentor Ayatollah Hossein Ali Montazeri. Professor Kadivar obtained his master in Islamic Studies and Theology in 1993 at the Center of Tarbiyat Mudarris at Qom University. His master thesis was titled The Existence and the Essence of Time in Islamic Philosophy under the supervision of Professor Ahmad Ahmadi. Kadivar obtained his PhD in Islamic Philosophy and Theology from Tarbiyat Mudarris University in Tehran in 1999 under the supervision of Professor Ghulam Hossein Ibrahimi Dinani. Professor Kadivar is a prolific author and has published 30 books and has been writing extensively in various well-recognized journals and has over 200 articles to his name. From 1998 to 2003, Kadivar acted as a director of Department of Philosophy and Theology at the Center of Scientific and Cultural Publishing in Tehran. He also was a member of Research Council for Social Security Research Institute in Tehran from 1998 to 2005. Kadivar has given lectures in some of international well-recognized universities such as Columbia, Stanford, George Washington, Georgetown, Virginia, California, North Carolina, Duke, and Harvard University, as well as Tokyo, Doshisho in Kyoto, and Oxford University in England. With an invitation from the University of Virginia in September 2008, Kadivar went to the United States, and during academic year 2008-2009, he was the visiting professor of religious studies of University of Virginia in Charlottesville department. Consequently, he was invited to Duke University in North Carolina for the academic year 2009 and 2010 up until today. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Mohsen Kadivar to start his talk. And Professor Kadivar, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So it's my pleasure and honor to give the annual lecture of British Society of Middle Eastern Studies. Thank you for your kind words, Alam. And Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The topic of my presentation is Transformation of Islamic Republic to Islamic State of Iran. Islamic Republic of Iran was a competitive electoral or authoritarian regime since 1979 to 2019. It was transformed to non-competitive electoral authoritarian regime since early 2020. There are several evidence that it will be transformed to non-electoral authoritarian regime or the Islamic State of Iran soon. This is the abstract of my presentation. In this presentation, I try to describe these three different steps of revolutionary Iran, clarify the characteristics of each step, and analyze the reason of these transformations. My presentations includes 4 introductory remarks and 4 sections. The 4 sections are Ayatollah Khomeini's period, 1979 to 1989, Khamenei's first period, 1989 to 2019, 9 competitive electoral authoritarian regime, the second Khamenei's period, and finally, non-electoral authoritarian regime, the 4th and the final section. Introductory remarks. The first, although theoretically, Iranian constitution introduced a hybrid of a democratic republican regime as well as an Islamic authoritarian regime based on the absolute guardianship of the jurist ruler, al-Wilayatul Mutlaqa lil-Faqih, but practically, it is not a hybrid regime. It's a moderate authoritarian. It means that in its present situation, it's much better than hard autocratic regimes. Almost all of Persian Gulf regimes, such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain, are hard autocracy. There is no elected parliament in these absolute monarchies. The ranking of Iran among moderate autocratic regimes in the index of democracy is higher than many Arab or Muslim countries such as Egypt and Bangladesh. This is not the advantage of Islamic Republic of Iran. This is because of the low ranking of democratic situation in the Middle Eastern countries, unfortunately. The second remark, Iran was among the first 3 countries in Asia and Africa that went under constitutionalism in early 20th century. The 1905 constitution was not the practical criteria of monarch administration in late Qajar period and almost all Pahlavi's period. The short spring of the rule of law, implementation of constitution and democracy in Iran was around 1950 to 1953. Iranian parliament elected Mohammad Mossadegh as the prime minister. He nationalized Iranian oil industry. This secular, democratic prime minister was overthrown by a coup in August 1953. This coup was orchestrated by MI6 and CIA. The absolute monarch of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was imposed to Iranian citizens for a quarter of a century. The anti-Western 1979 revolution in Iran was the direct fruit of this coup. Third remark, despotism, tyrannism, sultanism, monarchism, autocratism, and any other types of dictatorship are the political regimes of pre-modern period, regardless of Eastern or Western. Among the Muslims or non-Muslims, we can find democratic approach as well as non-democratic approach among Muslims and non-Muslims the same. Since mid-20th century, different factions of Iranian Muslims has competed to follow and implement their political visions. One faction in different forms and names have advocated republicanism, rule of law, and adherence of political and civil liberties. Another faction has sought Sharia as a state law and necessity of establishment of Islamic State and justified resort to violence for implementing Islamic principles. The latter has become more powerful gradually and has excluded the former from all key decision-making institutions in the Islamic Republic of Iran. The authoritarian approach to politics belongs to fundamentalist Muslims, regardless they are Shiite or Sunnis, not only Shiites. It does not mean that Islam supports authoritarianism. It is correct to say that those who believe in Islamic State advocate authoritarianism. Among the Shiite jurists, those who advocate the absolute guardianship of the jurist ruler, al-wilayatul mutlaq al-faqih, or even the political guardianship of the jurist, al-wilayatul siyasi al-faqih, are in minority. And this minority is Ayatollah Khomeini and most of his students, not all of his students today. My criticism is about a specific political regime that introduces itself as Islamic or as Shiite Islam. The Iranian governments weaponize Islam or Shiite Islam or abuse them for their political instruments, as their political instruments. The fourth and the last remark. The essentials of Iranian regime by present have been two. The first, the absolute guardianship of the jurist ruler as the protector of Islamic side, that is authoritarianism in practice. And the second, the elections as the republicanism. The former was expanded gradually and tremendously, and the latter shortened and weakened by degrees. The competition was excluded from the election, and the election will be excluded from Islamic Republic in the next step to reach perfect or true Islamic state. If this analysis is correct, it means that the unique essential of Iranian revolutionary regime is its authoritarianism or the absolute guardianship of the jurist ruler, nothing else. And election, regardless to be competitive or non-competitive or republicanism, is accidental and removable. Therefore, the correct understanding of the Iranian revolutionary regime depends on the accurate elaboration of this essential element. End of my remarks. And now section 1. Ayatollah Khomeini's period, 1979 to 1989, according to Islamic Republic, these two terms. A. The slogans of Iranian Muslims in their demonstration against Shah in 1978 and 1979 were independence or sovereignty, freedom, and justice. That means negating dependence of their country to the United States or European countries, censorship, suppression, violation of legal liberty, discrimination, and institutional corruption. They were against all of these issues. Iranian Muslims added one other slogan, Islamic State, al-Hukuma al-Islamiyya, or in Persian, Hukumat Islami, to these slogans. But it was an ambiguous term, and there were many questions about its boundaries and limit of the ruler's power. Ayatollah Khomeini himself advocated the general guardianship of the jurist ruler, al-Wilayatul Amma al-Faqih, since 1960s in Qom. He discussed his political theory briefly around 1965 when he was in exile in Turkey, Bursa. And he taught his political theory in details in February 1970 in 12 sessions in Najaf Seminary. Its treatise, The Guardianship of the Jurist or Islamic State, Wilayat al-Faqih ya Hukumat Islami, Wilayat al-Faqih or al-Hukumat al-Islamiyya in Persian, was published. So, in his treatises is published in April 1970. His arguments were about political Islam. In this political Islam, the Shiite jurists played the central role. The believers, al-Mu'minun, should support and obey these jurists. Political theory of Ayatollah Khomeini was close to political theories of Abu al-A'la Maududi and Sayyid Qutb. I'm not sure that he read them or not, but they're very close to each other. He expanded the context of guardianship of jurists in civil matters or judiciary case in Shiite hadith and fiqh to political issues, and introduced them as the successor of the jurist, as the successor of the hidden imam in the time of occultation. According to him, there is no difference between the authority of the Prophet or Shiite imams on one hand and the authority of the jurists on the other hand in public domain and political administration. They are the same. This is the major point of his theory. The Sharia rulings are the state law, and the jurist is the ruler of this state. He did not discuss about how a jurist become a ruler and what should be done in the case of conflicts between jurists while all of them are the successor of the hidden imam, or the type of a state, republican, parliamentarism, autocratic, aristocratic, and so on. He did not mention them. It's raw political plan. His political knowledge was simplistic and primary in this treatise. B. When Ayatollah immigrated to France after restriction of Iraqi governments for him, he had his chance to talk with his consultors, as Ibrahim Yazdi from US and Abul Hassan Bani Sadr and Sadeh Qutbzadeh from France. They were Iranian dissidents who studied and lived in US and France for a long time. They were the translators of Ayatollah in his international interviews. In his interview with Le Figaro magazine in Neuville-le-Château, October 14, 1978. This is very important date for Iranians. Ayatollah Khomeini declared that establishment of Islamic Republic would be the aim of the revolution in Iran for the first time. Before this date, he talked about Islamic State. It's the first time that he used Republic, Islamic Republic. When he was asked repeatedly what he meant by this term, he responded, Islamic means the law of the new regime will base on Sharia. And Republican is the type of governance the same as Republican here means France. I heard this from him exactly in 1978. He described the Islamic State as what Prophet Muhammad did in Medina and what Imam Ali did in Kufa. The citizens were aware of the justice of their Prophet and Imam. They loved them. So the Islamic State was a return to their spiritual teachings and dogmas. Because of these religious archetypes, there was not a lot of questions about the concept and the scope of Islamic governance and rulers. They trusted Ayatollah Khomeini as one of the Shiite authorities, al-Maraja' al-Taqlid, and followed him in voting for the Islamic Republic, although they knew very little about it. They loved him, they loved Ayatollah Khomeini, and based on this love, they accepted his political theory, despite knowing nothing about it, besides general knowledge about early Islam. He hardly ever clarified the difference between Islamic Republic and Islamic State. He never used the term of guardianship of jurists, Velayat al-Faqih, in this period in France, and confined his role in the future of Iran as a supervisor, not a ruler. The ruler or the president will be elected by the citizens, and they will not him. Ayatollah Khomeini, as the spiritual leader, was accepted by the strong majority of Iranians, more than 98% on that time. But as the ruler of Sharia-based guardian, al-Walayat al-Sharia was something else. We cannot say he was accepted in the same percentage. Khomeini himself was possibly not sure that the citizens would accept this political theory, guardianship of the jurists, if they understood it clearly. Because of it, he did not talk about it even one time. See, a few days before referendum, Provisional Prime Minister Mehdi Bazargan, a liberal Democrat scholar, expressed that the name of the new regime should be Democratic Islamic Republic of Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini rejected this, responding frankly, Islamic Republic, neither one word more nor one word less. He added, Islam includes the best type of democracy. We do not need to add democratic to this term. The second event on that time that is so important for me, Murtaza Mutahhari, 1919-1979, the ideologue and theorist of Islamic Republic, who was assassinated by a radical terrorist group in May 1979, 2 months after victory of revolution. In his TV interview that was broadcasted a few days before the referendum of Islamic Republic, introduced Islamic Republic in a democratic way with many differences with the articles of upcoming constitution and Khomeini's practice in future. The vote belongs to this, I think, introduction of Mutahhari, not what we had in future. I will explain it. A referendum on creating an Islamic Republic was held in March 1979. That was a two-parts ballot. Green means yes, and red means no. It was approved by a strong majority of Iranians, including me. The term of Islamic Republic was really unclear. The guardianship of jurist ruler was absent from public domain of Iran by fall 1979. The draft of constitution that was written by 4 lawyers in the office of Ayatollah Khomeini and was revised by the office of provisional government Bazargan There was nothing about guardianship of jurist ruler in it. And it was Islamic Democratic Republican, nothing else. The Assembly of Experts of the Constitution, مجلس الخبراء للقانون الأساسي or مجلس خبرگان قانون اساسی, 80% of its members were clergies. They added the guardianship of the jurists to the Constitution and prepared a hybrid regime. Article 5, I will read 4 articles of this Constitution, 2 articles from non-democratic side and 2 articles from democratic side. The first 2 articles, Article 5, the Velaya or guardianship and leadership of the Ummah. They did not mention nation, they mentioned Ummah, it's Muslim community. The rulership of the Ummah devolved upon the jurist ruler and possessed of administrative ability. And Article 110 introduces duties and powers of the jurist ruler in six broad issues above the 3 powers such as supreme command of the armed forces, appointment, dismissal, and acceptance of resignation of the jurists of the Guardian Council, the supreme judicial authorities, the director of the radio and TV network, and the chief commander of the Islamic Revolution Guard. The jurist ruler is really supreme leader. On the other hand, there were 2 articles in support of national sovereignty in the same constitution. Article 6. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, the affairs of the country must be administered on the basis of public opinion expressed by the means of the election, including the elections of the president, the representatives of the legislative power, and the members of the city councils, or by means of referenda in matters specified in other articles of this constitution. So this is a very, I think, progressive article. And Article 56, absolute sovereignty over the world and man belongs to God, and it is who has made man master of his own social destiny. No one can deprive man of his divine right, nor subordinate it to the vested interest of a particular individual or group. The people are to exercise this divine right in the manner specified in the following articles. When you read it, you remember John Locke. Okay. E. The Assembly of Experts of the Constitution ratified the articles related to the guardianship of the jurist ruler hurriedly without enough discussions. Less than 1 hour. After ratification, Ayatollah Khomeini supported it strongly for the first time. This is the direct quotation of Ayatollah Khomeini in the first hours after ratification of this article. I assure all strata of the nation and all law enforcement forces that if guardianship of jurist ruler and jurists supervise the affairs of the Islamic State, no harm will be done to this country. A speaker and writers should not be worried about the Islamic State and guardianship of the jurist ruler. As prescribed by Islam and other imams, guardianship of the jurist ruler will do no harm to anyone, nor will it bring about any kind of dictatorship or act against the interests of the country. If the government, the president, or anyone else acts in contrast to the interests of the country, jurist ruler will bridle them. The translation belongs to his website, not me. Do not be afraid of Islam, fiqh, and guardianship of jurist ruler. Follow the same path taken by the nation and move along with them. End of his quotation. In his terminology, dictator is the ruler who acts against the interest of the country. The jurist ruler is the one who identifies the interests of the country. The president or other governments may act in contrast to the interest of the country, but it would be impossible that the jurist ruler do the same issue. Everyone is under supervision of the jurist ruler, and he is under supervision of God. The understanding of Ayatollah and his student, such as Ayatollah Abdullah Javadi Amuli, my mentor, of republic is something that is supported by the republic, Jumhur nas, something that is approved by republic in Arabic, by Jumhur nas is republic. Based on his definition, he frankly mentioned, Javadi Amuli mentioned, wrote in his book, Islam is republic. The Quran is republic. Why? Because they were accepted by the republic, means by Jumhur nas, by people, by the masses. Iranian regime is republic because it was supported by Jumhur, means the masses. This is the meaning of republic in their understanding. F. Ayatollah Sayyid Kazem Shariat Madari, 1906 and 1986. Another Shiite authority, Al-Marja' al-Taqlid, and competitive colleague of Ayatollah Khomeini, expressed his historical public statement in November 30, 1979, 2 days before referendum of the Constitution of Islamic Republic. Quotation from Shariat Madari. Looking at the Article 6 and 56 of the Constitution that I read, we find that basically the first referendum that overthrew the 2,500 years old monarchy in Iran and established the Islamic Republic is nothing but a recognition of authenticity of the nation's vote and respecting the opinion of the people in determining their own destiny. Therefore, the two articles of 6 and 56 of the Constitution, which are also in accordance with Sharia regulations, have established and interpreted the national sovereignty. But the Article 110 has deprived the people of their authority. And as a result, the Article 110 and two Articles 6 and 56 are completely opposite to each other. So this difference and contradiction cannot be resolved by resorting to any interpretation and justification. Ayatollah, end of his quotation. Ayatollah Shariat Madari did not participate in the referendum of the Constitution in December 1979. He was removed from public media and he was house arrested from April 17, 1982 until the end of his life, after being accused of knowing about the coup of Sadegh Qutbzadeh. Sadegh Qutbzadeh, he was one of 3 consultants of Ayatollah Khomeini. He was executed also in that year. G. There is a famous statement of Ayatollah Khomeini. Quotation, the criterion is the nation's vote. End of the quotation. June 1979. Does it mean that nation's vote is the criterion of everything? If so, it is democratic republicanism, or at least democracy. But Khomeini himself expressed this statement against critics, his critics. The nation, masses, voted his policy. Their vote is the criterion because it was correct, not because nation's vote became correct. It is clear if someone or even the nation, the total, all of the Iranians voted against Islam, definitely their votes are null and void. He will decide that the nation's vote or their representatives' decision are not against this Islam. Who will decide about this? The jurist ruler or his appointees. Hence, Ayatollah Khomeini's statements has a hidden part. The criterion is the nation's vote as far as the jurist ruler approves. This is Islamic democracy in Iran, nothing else. Democracy and public opinion or republicanism are acceptable as far as the jurist ruler or his men approve. Their votes or decisions or interest in minor issues or in any region that the jurist ruler gives permission are acceptable. But he has the right to veto anytime if he feels there is a conflict with Islam or interest of the country according to his understanding. We can say that republicanism and democracy are partially confirmed under umbrella and supervision of jurist ruler, not totally. H. In 1979 and 1980, the elections were the most competitive in the history of Islamic Republic in these 2 years, the first 2 years of the revolution. Since 1981, by the end of Ayatollah Khomeini's administration, all the elections were confined only to his followers who were loyal to Islamic Republic. The elections were competitive between two wings of his followers, rightists, later called fundamentalists, and leftists, later called reformists. There were freedom and competition in this restricted sphere. A strong majority of Iranian citizens supported Ayatollah Khomeini's policies. I can say at the end of his life, his supporters were more than 70% of Iranians. We can say there was the dictatorship of majority. The political minority was under political restriction. They could not have any activity in the independent political party or independent media. The free and competitive elections were only between two wings of the majority, rightists and leftists of the followers of Ayatollah Khomeini. Except the first election in 1980, the presidential election in the time of Ayatollah Khomeini were not competitive. In contrast, the elections of the prime ministers and the members of the legislative power in his time were competitive. Ayatollah Khomeini was old and ill. Assembly of experts, Majlis al-Khubara, elected Ayatollah Muntazeri, his most distinguished student, as the next jurist ruler of Iran in July 1985. Ayatollah Muntazeri heard that about 4,000 political prisoners were executed in the jails of Tehran and other cities of Iran without a new crime or a fair trial according to the governmental command of Ayatollah Khomeini. He wrote close protest letter to Ayatollah Khomeini and objected his illegal and described it as violation of Sharia criteria. Ayatollah Khomeini, few months later, fired Muntazeri illegally in March 1989, accusing him to have liberal ideas and plan to deliver the country to the liberals and the people of Mujahideen. Appointment and dismissal of the jurist ruler is the job of assembly of experts, not the jurist ruler himself. This event made a crisis for the future leadership of Islamic Republic of Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini ordered a governmental command, appointed a committee for amendment of the Constitution and determined the items and domain of changes in April 1989. He passed away 2 months later and did not see the amendment. It was Section 1. Section 2, Khamenei's first period, 1989 to 2019. The time of Khamenei administration could be divided to 3 periods. This is the first period that he continued the style of Ayatollah Khomeini. A. Assembly of Experts elected Sayyid Ali Khamenei as the second jurist ruler. The kingmaker was Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, the vice president of the Assembly of Experts. According to 1979 Constitution, the leader should be a Shiite authority, al-Marja al-Taqlid. And Khamenei was a third-ranking clergy. He was elected in the emergency situation, al-Shara'at al-Iftirariyya, based on the interest of the regime, al-Maslaha, Maslahatul Nizam, as a temporal leader by referendum of amendment of Constitution, but he was introduced publicly as the permanent leader, not a temporal leader. A detailed record of the sessions of June 4th and August 6th, 1989 of the Assembly of Experts have not been published yet. The amendment of Iranian Constitution 1989 expanded the authority of the jurist ruler to absolute authority. It is the first constitution that absolute authority of the ruler was mentioned. Eliminated the need of the leader to be a Shiite authority, Marja Taqlid, expanded the authority of the leader and the Guardian Council, eliminated the position of the Prime Minister, eliminated the Judiciary Committee, and putting the judiciary power under an appointed Chief Justice. We can say that the 1989 amendment made Islamic Republic several steps closer to Islamic State and reduced the domain of republicanism of the system. B. Expanding the authoritarian aspects of the regimes and weakening the democratic elements continued under the second leader of Islamic Republic, Khamenei. Khamenei restricted the democratic republican aspects of the Iranian regime at least in 3 ways. The first way, under his authority, the legal boundaries for electoral candidates were restricted in such a way that they had to adhere the progressive principle of guardianship of the jurist ruler in all elections. In the first, the qualification of ijtihad of the candidates of Assembly of Experts were transferred from the independent teachers of the big seminaries to the appointed jurists of the Guardian Council in 1999. In 1990, the Assembly of Experts became yes man in place of those who should monitor the leader's function, and the Constitution gave them this right to elect and dismiss the leader. The members of the Assembly of Experts have been appointed indirectly by the leader. The Guardian Council selected the loyal candidates that there is no meaningful difference between them, and the citizens elect among the selected list. This is the reality of election in Iran. There is a meaningless election. This is a show of election, not really election. Second, under the leadership, the supervision of the Guardian Council expanded to the level that conduct the pseudo-legal procedure of approving all candidates for elections, and Nidara al-Istiswabiyya. By emphasizing on vetting all candidates, this process practically blocks the dissidents from entering the electoral competition. This is arbitrary qualification of the candidates in presidential and parliament election. The Guardian Council is not responsive to anyone except the ruler. the qualification is absolutely arbitrary, situational, and political. Third, Khamenei developed the illegal procedure of engineering elections. The juris rural, as the supervisor of the public sphere and the religious guardian of the people who are minors in this realm, in political realms, is allowed to cancel or reject the polls, change the vote in order to deflect the danger from the election result. This was happened in 2009 presidential election and Green Movement aftermath. The people voted Mir Hossein Mousavi, but the favorite candidate of the regime was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad was introduced as the president, and Mousavi and his wife have been in house arrest since 2011 for more than 10 years. But the expenses of engineering the votes are so high and expensive. This is not something that the regime can bear to continue. Because of this, the regime chose the new technique that I will discuss it in the next section. See, the time of Ayatollah Khomeini, in the time of Ayatollah Khomeini, he was supported by a high majority of Iranians. His successor does not have this sovereignty, and his legitimacy and his charisma. All of them, I think he has some shortcoming. This means that the political reformists, the former leftist wing of Khomeini's followers, became the critics of Khomeini's administration. Because of that, Khomeini excluded them from the system gradually. It took 3 decades, and now the regime includes only the conservatives. He tried to make 2 new wings among the conservatives, moderate and hardliners. There was freedom for them that compete each other. The concern of Islamic Republic is this: Iranians do not vote to the favorite candidates of the regime. They vote the furthest candidates from the regime in each election. What should they do? This is their concern. In the time of Khamenei, except the election of 1989 and 1993, all the presidential elections by 2017 were competitive. The first competitive presidential election in his period was in 1997 election, that Sayyid Muhammad Khatami, the reformist candidate, surprisingly became the president. The favorite candidate of the regime on that time was Ali Akbar Natiq Nouri. The votes turnout percentage was 79.92. 79.92%. And his percentage of vote was 69.06. He won the election in 1993 by 77.01% too. In 2005 presidential elections, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was elected in the second round by 61.69 turnout. The voter turnout percentage, this percent was his vote. The voter turnout percentage was 59.76. 59.76. He was hiddenly the candidate of the regime. But the masses imagined that Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani was the candidate of the regime. For the first time, Hashemi Rafsanjani and Mehdi Karroumi accused the regime to engineering the election, especially in the first round. There was a deep conflict in 2009 presidential election. The voters' turnout percentage was 84.83. This is a revolutionary country. The turnout at the election, 84%, the highest in the history of Islamic Republic. The majority of citizens thought that Mir Hossein Mousavi was the winner of this election with 62.63% of the votes. But the regime introduced this percent for Ahmadinejad without giving the details of the election. The advocates of Mousavi demonstrated in protest against engineering the election. The regime could not convince the citizens. More than 100 demonstrators were killed in the street or in the prison. More than 5,000 reformist activists were imprisoned up to 7 years. The two candidates that did not accept the result of this election, Mousavi and Karoubi and their wives, were house arrested illegally since 2011. The regime excluded reformist candidates in presidential elections since 2013. Why? Because they would be the winner. In 2013 election, the hardliners candidates were 4, and only one moderate conservative was qualified, Hassan Rouhani. The vote turnout percentage was 72.94%. Rouhani won with 50.71%. The last competitive presidential election was held in 2017. The competition was between Hassan Rouhani, moderate conservative, and Ibrahim Raisi, hardliner. Raisi was the favorite of the regime. Everyone knew this. The voters' turnout percentage was 73.33%. And the percent of Rouhani's vote was 57.14, about 6.8% more than the first round. This type the percentage of Raisi was 38.28%. It was not only the big defeat of Raisi and hardliners, but the defeat of Islamic Republic and its leader. This was the public opinion, and that was not wrong. Analyzing the result of this election was the reason for next strategic decision, and it will be discussed in the next section. D. The parliament election in this period, 1989 to 2009, were competitive, but each time the number of disqualified candidates, mostly reformists, and the number of independent candidates were decreased. In the last election of this period, 2016, the percent of reformists was 19%, and the moderate conservative was 5%, and the hardliners were 13%. It is important that more than 51% of the members did not introduce their political direction. Why? Because they would be quite disqualified by the Guardianship Council. In this parliament, there were about 10 distinguished members who criticized the regime's policy. It is important to know that the Assembly of Experts election of 2016, we cannot find even one independent member. There was only one independent member in the previous election, and he was excluded. I can conclude in this section that Islamic Republic and Khamenei's administration were supported by no more than 38% of Iranians in 2017. In the best situation, it is impossible for him and his men, means hardliners, to win in any fair and competitive election, even in the most restricted elections. Engineering the elections has a lot of expenses. It remains only one solution: eliminating the competition. Section 3. Non-competitive electoral authoritarian regime, Khamenei's second period. This is a turning point. Khamenei learned that he and his men could not win in any referendum or fair competitive election, which means that the regime could not tolerate competitive election. Islamic Republic has experienced a non-competitive electoral authoritarian regime since early 2020. This type of non-competitive election was tested in the Assembly of Experts election of 2016. Zero competition, 100% yes man. It worked. The second step was legislative election of 2020 with only 42.6% of eligible votes in 2020. Iran has seen the lowest turnout in a parliamentary election since 1979 revolution. while the turnout of 2016 election of parliament was 61.64, decreasing 19.07 in 4 years. The percent of principalists means hardliners in this non-competitive election was 76.20, and the reformist was 6.89%. You can understand what happened. So the third step was 2021 presidential election. 7 candidates were qualified, 5 hardliners, and 2 naive reformists only for the show of diversity. They were not the candidate of the reformists. The favorite candidate of the regime was Ibrahim Raisi. The others were invited to take a part in this governmental show. The new evidence of this election was disqualification of Ali Larijani. This is so important. The moderate conservative. He was the Speaker of the Parliament for 12 years, 2008 since by 2020. He was disqualified to be a president of this country. Undoubtedly, he would win the election if he was qualified. He would be the candidate of the moderate conservative and reformist. The 2021 presidential election set a new record for the lowest turnout in Iranian electoral history for a presidential election, 48.48%. This election also had the highest share of protest blank, invalid, and the lost votes, around 13%. While considering a protest voting religiously forbidden, haram, as it would weaken the regime, Khamenei's fatwa. The percentages of Raisi's vote was 61.9%. The turnout of this election was 24.85%, less than 2017 election. If we consider invalid votes, the turnout was jumped down more than this. This means that the Islamic Republic of Iran is a non-competitive election, is supported by only 35% of Iranians in 2021. 35%. This is a crisis of legitimacy. You should compare with the others that I do not have time to read them. The leader excluded the reformists since 2005 and the moderate conservatives since June 2021 from the electoral process. Presently, in addition to the Revolutionary Guards, all 3 branches of governments are in the hand of the loyal, radical conservatives, fundamentalists, or hardliners. And the last section, section 4, non-electoral authoritarian regime. A, Islamic Republic cannot continue with non-competitive electoral authoritarianism. Election without competition is meaningless. Why should it be kept? Islamic Republic plans to get rid of it. Please pay attention to this important message of the leader of Islamic Republic of Iran. Khamenei expressed in his public speech of June 5, 2021, so recently. Today, quotation, direct quotation. Today, religious democracy and the participation of the people are possible through elections. There may become a time when elections become meaningless and other forms of public participation emerge. End of quotation. He means by religious democracy, Islamic democracy, what we feel in his administration in these 32 years. I'm not sure that he understands the meaning of democracy. Democracy is democracy. It does not accept such adjectives. How can he call a lifetime, absolute, and uncountable rulership democratic? Participation of people requires recognition their civil, political, and basic rights. Without free, fair, and competitive election, claim of participation of the people is meaningless. His last statement is noticeable. In which situation the election will be meaningless? My answer is when the result of the election is harmful for the governments. And it happens when the minority governs over majority. What does he mean by other forms of public participation? It needs clarification. I do not have any idea, but I'm sure that non-electoral public participation is neither democracy nor Republican regime. It will be hard authoritarian regime, nothing else. B, the cost of election shows is for deflecting the allegation of dictatorship and tyranny. Otherwise, under absolute appointive guardianship of jurist ruler, there are no credible elections. This is what I learned from Ayatollah Nasser Makarem Shirazi, one of the Shiite authorities today, more than 90 years old, the jurist advocator of the regime. It means that he very frankly, this is the first text, fiqh text, juridical text that I found that it shows that election in under supervision of the guardianship of a jurist is only a show. It does not have any reality. The other conservative jurist, who was the jurist of Guardian Council, Shurai Negahbar, for 3 decades, Muhammad Mu'min Qumi, wrote, please pay attention to this direct quotation. This is the meaning of election in Islamic Republic from one of its founders. Quotation, the jurist ruler has to be bound by Sharia laws. But other than that, it's not limited to any pattern or any institution for governing the country. He does not have to have the president at the helm or the constitute to a House of Representatives or appoint a constitution for running the country or to accept it or to appoint a guardian council at all. He does not have to appoint the head of judiciary or the armed forces or limit himself through appointing a certain way of ratifying laws in the parliament. Instead, given being bound by Sharia law, he is free to govern the country. He can legislate himself or give the responsibility to an appointed group. He can judge or appoint somebody to judge. He can command the armed forces or appoint a commander. In all these situations, in all parts of government, he can act based on expediency according to his own view. He can decide and act. I wrote in his book, he wrote this. This means exactly arbitrary ruling. This is not ruling of law. And he was the jurist member of Guardian Council for 3 decades. It's his understanding of ruling law. See, Khamenei said a decade ago, direct quotation, if it is felt that the parliamentary system is better for electing executive officials, there is nothing wrong with changing the current mechanism, end of quotation. It means that he has some concerns in presidential system. The problem is direct presidential election by the people that is out of the regime control. If the president would be elected by the members of the parliament, it will be fine because the legislative election could be under regime control. All of the presidents of Islamic Republic of Iran have had problem with the guardianship jurist ruler, Wilayat al-Faqih. Bani Sadr, the first president of Iran, was dismissed by the parliament because of his conflict with non-elected part of Islamic Republic. Khamenei himself had conflict with prime minister that was elected by the parliament, Mir Hossein Mousavi. Ayatollah Khomeini supported Mousavi and Khamenei was figurehead president. Mousavi has been in house arrest since 2011. I repeat these 3 for 10 years. Illegal house arrest, what does it mean? Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani was kingmaker of Khamenei in 1987. He had a conflict with leader since 2005. Rafsanjani supported the Green Movement. He disagreed with Khamenei's recent administration. His death in January 2017 was absolutely suspicious. Muhammad Khatami was marginalized after 2009, and the media are not allowed to publish his picture or mention his name. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who has the favorite president of the regime, 2007 by 2011, has conflicted with the leader since 2011. He is a populist dissident now. Hassan Rouhani has been treated to be trailed by the hardliners. We can say that the conflict between the rulers and the presidents are essential to Islamic Republic of Iran. This is because of this unsolvable paradox that the country cannot have two rulers. It should have president or the ruler. So the hardliners plan to remove president, and the advocatory of republicanism and democracy think about exclusion of the guardianship of the Jewish ruler. The majority of Iranians advocate the latter. And my last points. The political office of the Revolutionary Guard, who always justified the real commands of the leader, started paving the way for transition of Islamic Republic to Islamic State of Iran several times. These statements have important implications. I found two approaches to the combinations of Islamic Republic and Islamic State. Please pay more attention to these points, my last points. Two approaches. The first approach, there is no difference between them, between Islamic Republic and Islamic State. That means Islamic Republic from the beginning has been Islamic State. We should not have any expectation of republic term. Republic means acceptance in the beginning. Iranian accepted Islamic State in early 1979. And because of this historical acceptance, this regime has been called Islamic Republic. Republicanism is not the name of any specific time of governance. The essential of this governance are two: Islamic criteria under supervision of the Jewish ruler who decides based on interests of the regime, and the second, it's hereditary monarchy. It's not hereditary monarchy. Ayatollah Misbah is Muhammad Taqi Misbah Yazdi said this in 1999. This was his interpretation of Islamic Republic. Khamenei introduced Misbah as the theorist and ideologue of Islamic Republic several times. I narrated the justification of Ayatollah Abdullah Jawadi Amuli earlier. According to this approach, there is no need for changing the name of the state. We should correct our understanding. Islamic Republic has been Islamic State from the beginning. Do not expect more of it. Second approach, Islamic Republic is a transition to the Islamic State. In the beginning, Iranians were not prepared for accepting Islamic State. That means guardianship of the Jewish ruler, with all of its consequences. So, the revolutionary leader established Islamic Republic that is partially, but not totally, Islamic State. The people will get ready in the transition time to reach a full Islamic State, that there is nothing like Republic Western type in it. True Islamic State is purely and 100% Islamic. There are three justifications for
Professor Kadivar, could you please, the time, we need some time for Q&A. If you wrap up. Thank you.
There are three justifications for this approach. First justification, Islamic Republic was a tactic to deceive the enemy. The Western countries were deceived and thought that the new regime in Iran would be democratic and Republican. Hence, they would stop their hostility to the new regime. I do not read my point here about it. The first one who exactly mentioned this point was Jalaluddin Farsi, the Islamist theorist and the candidate of Islamic Republic Party in the first presidential election, said this in 1988. The second justification, Islamic Republic as an emergency solution. The third justification, Islamic Republic as a temporal interest or expediency. Both of these were mentioned by Ayatollah Muhammad Taqi Misbah Yazdi. I do not read the quotation here. And the last point, such justifications distort the honesty of leaders of Islamic Republic. Honesty is the biggest asset of a religious leader. I found these two approaches and these three justifications in my book, Governance by Guardianship in 1999. Its English translation is forthcoming by the Global Middle East series at Cambridge University Press. Dishonesty was only a probability on that time. No, I do not have any solution for solving this problem except dishonesty. Dishonesty of the leaders of Islamic Republic is a certain issue based on these evidences. I conclude, since 1979, leaders of revolutionary Iran have never believed in the Republican side of the Islamic Republic. And now it is a time to transform and unveil the reality of the regime, the Islamic State of Iran, non-electoral authoritarian regime, and Shiite version of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan is Taliban. The Islamic Republic has been in transition to Islamic State since its beginning. Thanks for your patience. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Professor.